Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, following the recent salmonella scare, the Senate passes a bill that would give the State Department of Agriculture more power. Georgia could be one step closer to a statewide sales tax to fund transportation projects. And our leadership series of interviews continues with Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, Representative Tom Graves introduces 2 corporate tax bills designed to create jobs for Georgians.
And what's it like to be a freshman legislator serving in a body with hundreds of years of tradition? Minoo Hosseini finds out. But first, our top story tonight, the Senate votes to give the Georgia Department of Agriculture more investigative power. The Senate today passed a bill which aims to create more oversight of food processing facilities by the Department of Agriculture. Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman John Bullock sponsors SB 80, a bill which has been assembled in direct reaction to the salmonella outbreak originating at a peanut processing plant in Blakely, Georgia. Senator Bullock explains the bill and answers a question from Senator Nan Orrock, who believes the amendment, which passed on the floor today, actually weakens the bill.
It requires that the testing for substances of injurious to a person's health, that any time that a test comes back positive, that the company would have to report that test to the department within 24 hours. They would also have to maintain those test results for 2 years, and they would have to make those records available to the department for them to view at any time during business hours that they wanted to. Most all of your food processing facilities, they have a plan that they operate under and protocol that to ensure that the products that they ship are safe. And so what the amendment does is it would allow for a company to present a plan to the department.
It's my concern that the language of the amendment weakens the bill that you've worked so hard on in committee, because it seems like on line 11 and 12 and 13 of the amendment that's on our desk, it allows the companies to set up their own hazard analysis critical control plan and then use it instead of the rules and regs that the commissioner makes. That they can follow their own plan instead of complying with the regimen that is established by the commissioner.
They don't have to accept it, but this gives them that ability to. If the department doesn't want to accept any of them, they can create their own rules and regulations. It just gives the department another avenue and help from that facility. It's not industry-wide, it's just from each facility with their own plan.
And SB 80 ended up passing by a vote of 50-0. It now goes to the House. Also be sure to tune into Lawmakers tomorrow for GPB Radio's John Sepulveda's in-depth look into this legislation and the overall impact of the salmonella outbreak in Georgia. Well, a special House Transportation Subcommittee today unanimously approved a wide sweeping transportation proposal, one which does away with the Georgia Department of Transportation. Valerie Edwards is live at the Capitol with more. Valerie.
In Nwandi, at today's Transportation Committee meeting on House Bill 277, lawmakers heard words like stagnant, anemic, outdated, mired, all references to how inefficiently the Department of Transportation has been in undertaking and completing road improvement projects. And from around the state, stakeholders treated the committee to a heavy dose of frustration. Steve Parks is a former DOT employee.
So some 15 to 20 years ago, we started seeing needs being identified that there was no funding attached to, and all we could do was throw those needs over into long-range plans or what we call an identified projects file. What that did then, it generated a period of stagnation in our transportation industry in this state, and we have been mired in that now for many, many, many years.
House Bill 277 creates the Georgia 2020 Transportation Fund, responsible for drawing up a list of road construction projects and allocating funds to complete those projects. Now, the measure is linked to a 1% transportation sales tax, commonly referred to as a T-SPLOST. The House resolution creating the T-SPLOST also passed the subcommittee. And in November 2010, voters will be asked to vote on the T-SPLOST. However, for some, even next November is too long to wait. Charles Krautler directs the Atlanta Regional Council.
Just because a public vote doesn't happen until November 2010, we can put this off. We need to tell the public that we have a plan to fix this mess. We need to tell businesses around the nation that we have a plan to fix this mess. We're losing businesses to other areas because when they ask what we're doing about transportation, the answer is we have plans that aren't being built. And we need money to build those plans, and this legislation would allow us to do that.
The full House Transportation Committee will reconvene tomorrow at 5 p.m. to hear continuing testimony on the 2020 transportation proposal. Keep in mind that this is the second proposal we've heard this week from the General Assembly that does away with the DOT. Earlier, we heard from Senate leaders on the creation of a new state agency, the State Transportation Authority, which would create a public-private transportation partnership. Reporting live, I'm Valerie Edwards for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Valerie. Well, among the 4 pro-business economic stimulus bills introduced in the House today is a measure to eliminate the state's corporate income tax. Representative Tom Graves announced the Jobs, Opportunity, and Business Success Act of 2009 at a press conference this afternoon.
Every day there are citizens of our state who with great pride they go to work anticipating that paycheck to provide for their family, only to find out that their position has been cut.
Graves' 2-bill stimulus package includes temporary tax credits for employers who hire those who have been out of work for 2 months or more, a 1-year waiver of the $100 filing fee to start a new business, elimination of the sales tax deposit required by the Department of Revenue, and a 12-year phase-out of the corporate income tax. In addition, the plan would allow voters to decide whether to eliminate the state inventory tax. The measure enjoys support from Republican leaders in the House and Senate.
The greatest stimulus to growing jobs and keeping business profitable in this state and in any state is keep the regulations off of them and keep their tax burden low, and they can grow jobs.
I fear we're moving in a different direction nationally, but Georgia should stand as a beacon to stand up and say there is a better way. A way that works, a way that is proven, and that is let people be free, let the economy be free, let each and every one of us take care of ourselves with as little government regulation as possible.
House Ways and Means Chair Larry O'Neill also introduced the Business Expansion Support Act today in House Bills 438 and 439, providing tax breaks for employers that offer high wages, training, or research and development opportunities. House Bills 438, 439, 481, and 482 are all in the House Ways and Means Committee.
County tax assessors may soon have to consider foreclosure or bank-owned sales of comparable property in determining fair market value. The Senate today approved Senate Bill 55. The changes could mean a decrease in property taxes for some homeowners, but Senator Steve Thompson had questions about the eventual impact on the seller. One of the bill's sponsors, Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers, explains SB 55.
Senate Bill 55 simply corrects a problem with the assessment process that was probably not considered when the assessment process began, and that was that there may come a time where a large portion of the housing market is actually not from private owner to private owner, but as far as an individual is concerned, but rather from a bank to an owner through the short sale process or the foreclosure process. And this just simply makes sure that the assessment process actually considers the entire fair market. These are all arm's-length transactions, and they should be considered when determining the value of a property.
Some were concerned it would drive the values in the neighborhood down because you're giving a comparable of a foreclosed value.
For tax purposes, you hope it does drive the value down. For selling purposes, the market is what the market is.
If you're selling, though, you don't want it to drive it down. You want it to be valued as high as you can, don't you?
Well, yes, sir, but I've bought and sold a lot of properties, as I'm sure many people in this building have, and when I go to buy a piece of property, I'm going to buy it for the lowest price I can get for what it's worth, not necessarily what the assessor says it's worth.
The bottom line is that you're saying something from the buyer's perspective, and I'm trying to give the seller's perspective, and just pointing out on the other side that the value is lowered, which may be fair to the banks, but it could have the effect of possibly affecting neighborhood values if you were in the market to sell.
Well, I mean, that is hypothetical, but what we do know is that this will bring fair market value to what is supposed to be fair market value during the assessment process, and that's all this is trying to correct. And we had a very good discussion in committee, which you were part of that process, and I think we have a good product here.
SB 55 ended up passing 46-6 and now goes over to the House.
Bills that confront foreclosure are a hot topic of debate at the Capitol right now. The Senate Banking and Finance Committee heard legislation aimed at Georgia's lending and foreclosure policies this afternoon. Lawmakers Brittany Evans has that story.
Senate Bill 57, the Georgia Fair Lending Act, and SB 141 were both on the table today for debate. William J. Brennan, Jr. directs the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. Brennan spoke out in support of changes to SB 57 that would allow borrowers to sue lenders for knowingly offering them subprime loans. Borrowers would also be able to sue any subsequent buyer of the subprime loan. That's called assignee liability.
You know, all through these years, what kind of drove me crazy was the subprime lenders were doing these terrible things, and everybody knew about it. There were reports on the news media, and others kept buying their loans because they knew they could do it and no one would do anything about it. Now if you make it illegal for them, if you have liability for them at this end, they'll stop buying the bad loans. And I would submit, based on my experience of doing this work for over 20 years, I've been with Legal Aid 40 years, that will stop this problem in Georgia.
Richard Raymer, counsel for the Mortgage Bankers Association of Georgia, disagreed.
If you start assessing assignee liability against holders of mortgages, you're going to really create a dangerous situation. I think Mr. Brennan's problem is largely going to be solved, has been solved by the marketplace at this point.
Senator Vincent Ford didn't buy Raymer's logic.
The market has corrected itself. That's only after about 5 million foreclosures and the political devastation that we've seen over the last 2 years. The market didn't correct itself. The market imploded. And to sit up here and say that now everything's working out real fine because of the free market is just ludicrous.
Debate may continue next week for SB 57. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Brittany Evans.
Senator Gloria Butler took a point of personal privilege this morning to express her opinion that federal stimulus monies coming to Georgia should go towards underfunded government services and programs.
Did you know that in just 6 months, the state has seen a 15% increase in the number of households relying on food stamps? Medicaid assistance has increased by 8% in 1 year. Temporary aid to needy families, their numbers has grown by 1,000 recipients in only 6 months. During this time of need, employment within these programs has decreased by 20%. So the solution is this: Georgia needs to use the economic stimulus aid to expand and sustain services to the residents of this state.
The House today approved 3 measures. House Bill 301 changes the name of the State Board of Technical and Adult Education to the State Board of Technical College System of Georgia. Now, that bill passed without opposition and moves to the Senate. Representative Wendell Willard spearheaded passage of HB 185, delineating the judicial chain of command in case of public health emergency.
The Supreme Court had a commission review what are the emergency powers in the law, existing law, that address the judiciary. and they felt there were some things that need to be, quote, clarified. I spoke of the clarification being we had too many courts being named as far as where you could file an action or where you could appeal the action. So we wanted to have it clear where you start an action, or if you want to have appeal, where you would appeal that action.
House Bill 185 passed 159 to 5 and moves to the Senate. Representative Ed Lindsay presented HB 237, providing financial assistance to families adopting older children or youngsters with special needs.
The program is a need-based program and is reviewed annually by the Department of Family and Children's Services. The bill keeps us in compliance with federal law and regulation, therefore preserves approximately $31 million in federal funding.
HB 237 passed without dissenting vote and now moves to the Senate.
Legislation that would legalize Sunday alcohol sales got a hearing in the Senate Regulated Industry Committee late this afternoon. Senate Bill 16, sponsored by Senator Seth Harp, would allow counties or municipalities to decide whether to allow retailers to sell alcohol on Sundays. Now, this is the third year that Senator Harp has introduced this legislation, but it has failed to pass out of committee. Attempts to amend the measure to other legislation have also failed. Now, the measure has bipartisan support this year. However, those in opposition include the Christian Coalition, which believes that sales of alcohol on Sunday conflict with the idea that Sundays are sacred. We'll have coverage of the committee hearing tomorrow night on Lawmakers.
Well, it started with Representative Charlize Byrd's speech on the House floor and then a rebuttal from Representative Carla Drenner. But questions about certain courses at Georgia's public universities have gained national attention. Featured on CNN this morning, the topics in question include queer theory, oral sex, and male prostitution. Sociology professors Mindy Stumbler and Kirk Elfson from Georgia State University testified before the Senate Higher Education Committee today. They said they conduct research on these topics, which have major public health implications, but they don't teach courses on them.
I do not teach a course in oral sex at Georgia State University. I never have, and doubtfully I never will. I teach around 500 students a year, and in one of my classes, students started asking questions about oral sex. I didn't have the answers, and so I went to start a research project on the topic so that I could inform them. And I did this on my own time, again, because I think that being an active researcher makes me a better teacher.
The research that led to my expertise in male prostitution was funded totally, took care of my whole salary. CDC literally begged me to do this work. It's very dangerous work. They knew that I had started doing some of this work as a captain in Vietnam, 1971, 1972, for the State Department, because our men were visiting both male and female prostitutes. At that time, we didn't have HIV. We didn't know about it. It was an STD problem.
Although the legislature has no control over courses at state universities, it does control the university system budget.
We invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers. We invite you to visit that site and vote in our legislative issue poll. We'll bring you the results of that poll later this week.
Well, it's day 20 for the Georgia General Assembly, and while many legislators are used to the fast-paced environment, others were left feeling a bit overwhelmed by the commotion. Lawmakers Minoo Hosseini joins us with more about that. Minoo.
And Wandy, most legislators feel that this session in particular has been a rapidly moving one. Between the budget, trauma care, and education, many legislators feel that they're left scrambling to get things done.
I knew coming in that the session was going to be a tough session this year, particularly with the financial crisis that we're under. With abbreviated sessions and going in on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays as we adjusted coming through, it meant that those days particularly have been very hectic, and oftentimes the meeting schedules have gone almost changeable hour by hour. In many cases, BlackBerry will buzz and let you know that you've got a new meeting added to the schedule or one that's been changed, or I've had as many as 3 meetings going on at 3 different locations at the same time. So it gets kind of chaotic. The pace is fast and furious, and there's never a dull moment, and there's never a down minute, that's for sure.
Senator Lester Jackson, an experienced former House representative but a freshman senator, said that this year has been more stressful than most.
The sense of pace, the fast pace that this General Assembly is going through right now with all budget concerns and a lot of legislative concern that's going on right now. We're moving at an extremely fast pace. We're going really fast, so each of these, it goes all day and extends into the night.
And Senator Gail Buckner offered her input on why this session might seem more hectic than past sessions.
This year we have such a horrendous effort of trying to decide how to handle the state budget with now almost a $3 billion deficit. Programs, much needed programs, will likely be cut. So you just have to try and form a budget that's not going to impact the citizens in as tremendously a negative way. But when you're cutting $3 billion, that's going to be difficult.
Crossover Day is just 10 legislative days away, so even the veteran legislators will have to keep up the pace if they want to get their legislation to go through in time. Reporting live, I'm Minoo Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that story, Minoo. Well, our leadership interview series continues today with a veteran legislator, that's Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers. I had the opportunity to sit down with Senator Rogers earlier today and began our conversation by asking him about Georgia's portion of the federal stimulus package.
There's a lot of money in it, but there's also a lot of strings attached. You know, it's interesting because this is a bill that's over 1,000 pages. Some of the members in the United States Congress were complaining they didn't even have a chance to read it. So we're still digesting it. A lot of it is focused into areas like education, transportation, and Medicaid. But there's very little money that the federal government is just saying, here, have some money. I mean, there are all sorts of strings attached to it, what you can do, what you can't do. For example, if you have lowered or maybe increased the threshold for receiving Medicaid anytime in the last few months, that you would not be allowed to do that and still get the Medicaid money. So if you were a state who was trying to cut back on expenses on Medicaid and you change your thresholds, you may be disallowed. And that's just one of thousands of strings that are attached. So most of it will be focused on education, health care, and transportation, but we have to see what we can access.
You came to the well today to talk about the HTRG grants, and that was something last week. We weren't sure if the governor was going to pass it, but the recent news, things have changed. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, you know, when we came into this session, both the House and Senate said the one thing we need to do is make sure that we fund this homeowners tax relief grant. The governor was a little concerned that through his budget process, they'd not been able to find the $428 million. We found it. We went to the governor. He made a few modifications, added some more of the reserve money into it so that the cuts we brought to him, it wasn't fully $428 million worth of cuts. We used some reserve money. But through cuts and through using the reserve money, we were able to find that money and deliver on the homeowners tax relief. What
are some of your long-term goals when it comes to tax relief and tax breaks for corporations and the people of Georgia?
Well, my long-term goals are two things. Number one is to control spending in Georgia. Since I first came into the House of Representatives and now in the Senate, I have routinely offered legislation that would limit spending, how much we've spent. We've passed through the Senate this year a constitutional amendment that I hope my friends in the House will take up and pass that says, you know, if we create a budget surplus, if the taxpayers pay more than what's necessary to run government, then we ought to set that aside, put it in the rainy day fund, and if that gets above 10%, we ought to pay down debt or send it back to them. To me, that's responsible budgeting, so I would love to see that take place. And then the second thing is to move away from really a 19th century tax system that is based on property that we have in this state and move towards a transactional tax system. Our economy is no longer an agrarian economy, and I think the archaic property tax is really causing all sorts of concern. If you do polling, people will say they hate their property tax most is because it's the one they least understand. They don't understand how somebody comes out and says, hey, I think your property is worth more, now you need to pay more taxes. That's just not a very functional tax process in a 21st century economy. A transactional tax is much better, and hopefully we will move from the property tax towards a transactional tax while I'm in office.
Your new position is Majority Leader in the Senate. This is obviously a tough year to come in with this budget issue. How do you believe it's going so far, and what have some of been the new challenges?
Well, it's really a kind of a different perspective in just being a single senator from a single district who only works on the single issues that I brought to the table was obviously very challenging. But now, in a role of Majority Leader, you have to also worry about the entire agenda of the majority and helping other senators get through their legislative wish list, so to speak, and really form the policy that's going to make it through the state Senate. And I do enjoy that, but it does require an enormous amount of work. And as you pointed out, if you could pick any year to be Majority Leader, I'd take any of them. But this may be the last of the ones that I would have chosen because it has been tough, but I certainly enjoy it.
Okay. Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be with you.
In trying to find a reasonable penalty for teens who use cell phones while driving, the House Motor Vehicles Subcommittee decided Tuesday to lower the dollar penalty, but up the point penalty. Originally, House Bill 23 set a fine of $175 for a first offense and $500 for the second. Bill sponsor Matt Ramsey revised the fines to no more than $100.
If you get 4 points while under the age of 18 and holding a Class D permit, it's an automatic license suspension unless you go to school and work those points out. So rather than just pay that fine for the second offense, you will have gotten accumulated 4 points if you're a two-time offender, and you will have the option either go to school and work those points off, or you're going to have your license suspended. So we know there's real consequences beyond just paying more money in fines or having mom and dad pay more money in fines. We know for a fact that laws aimed at eliminating distractions, they've worked for teen drivers, and we know cell phones are the #1 distraction among teen drivers right now. If we move this bill forward and it ultimately gets enacted into law, we know for a fact that it will save lives, it will reduce crashes in this state.
And the next step for House Bill 23 is the full House Motor Vehicles Committee.
The Senate Urban Affairs Committee yesterday recommended passage of Senate Bill 89, allowing food service at transit stations. Kevin Perry, who represents the soft drink industry, said the bill could be mutually beneficial.
We never thought that we'd have to work to decriminalize the consumption of beverages or food, but that's what we are doing with this legislation, just to allow us the opportunity to put a vending machine or to partner with some of our restaurant partners at the MARTA station.
MARTA's Rhonda Ridley characterizes the bill as a self-help measure for a transit system that faces a 25% reduction in service by 2010.
We have to come up with some creative ways to bring in revenue streams. I think Kevin hit it on the head with the different branding opportunities. So this will go beyond just allowing us to have concessions and vendors. I mean, it brings some other opportunities with branding. There's all sorts of other things creatively that I think that we could do with passage of this legislation to generate additional funds.
Again, SB 89 was given a due pass recommendation by the Urban Affairs Committee and is now in Senate rules.
Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, the Senate is scheduled to debate Senator Preston Smith's extensive revision of the Georgia Indigent Defense System, and 2 of Governor Perdue's initiatives are expected to be in committee. Senate Bill 84, relative to school board governance, and Senate Bill 101, a tort reform measure that would limit the liability of pharmaceutical companies. We'll have coverage of those stories and all the latest Capitol news tomorrow night on Lawmakers at 7. And if you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. on GPB or 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can also keep up with all of the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up next on GPB television, a very powerful Georgia traveler. Tonight's episode features scenic mountain highways. Georgia Traveler is next here on GPB television.
And that's our broadcast for the 20th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Wendy Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. for Lawmakers. Good night.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.